in a crowded seafood market in a corner of Taipei. Before dawn, the sound of trucks rattling through the fog. Dozens of people have begun a day of urgent work. The workers here not only sell seafood but also demonstrate the skills that have been with them for decades, the skills of cutting sea eels and slicing giant groupers weighing up to hundreds of kilograms, amidst the stalls drenched in seawater and the flickering fluorescent lights. The sound of knives hitting cutting boards resounds continuously. A thin but sturdy man, wearing a short-sleeved raincoat, is using a long, extremely sharp knife to peel the skin of a sea eel. Each movement is performed quickly, precisely to the millimeter. Sea eels are not easy to handle. They are slippery, resilient and wriggle strongly. But with his hands scarred by knives, the man is not afraid at all. He placed the eel on the wooden board, used a knife to make a cut along the back, then rubbed the blade close to the bone, separating the meat like peeling a fruit. Each eel could be more than a meter long. But for him, it only took a few minutes. On the opposite side, a crowd was gathering to watch a special scene. A giant grouper had just been brought in. It weighed 100 kilos. Its body was dark black. Its skin was thick and hard like wood bark. It took 2 strong men to lift it onto the wooden operating table. The master craftsman, considered the grouper butcher in the market, stepped out. He had been in this profession for more than 30 years. In his hand was a large, sharp knife that was as shiny as a mirror. He was in no hurry. He gently stroked the back of the knife, then used a cloth string to tie it securely around his hand. Everyone held their breath, waiting. The knife swung up, then down, a strong, decisive cut across the gills of the fish. Blood gushed out, staining the cutting board red. He continued with the cuts along the body, sliding the knife blade into each large joint. His hands did not tremble. His eyes seemed to trace every line of the fish's body. The thick, white flesh appeared under the rough skin. The fish head was processed last. Someone had ordered it in advance to cook hot pot. Because the giant grouper head has soft cartilage, very popular in luxury restaurants. Each slice is not only a skill, but also an art. Taiwanese people attach great importance to the neatness and aesthetics of each seafood display tray. Cutting the fish so that the pieces are square, even, not broken, and have no meat left, that is the standard of a good craftsman. The grouper pieces are arranged in layers. The blood is wiped clean. The skin is peeled off. The bones and heads are placed in small basins for customers to choose from. The meat is quickly packaged, refrigerated and shipped immediately to large restaurants throughout Taipei. But this job is not easy to make a living. Cutting grouper and eel requires strength, patience and brutal meticulousness. Many new entrants cannot last a week. The knife is sharp but one mistake can cut the tendons of their hands. The fish meat is fishy and cold, making the workers' hands rough and stiff every morning. However, they still go to the market every day, from 2 a.m., preparing cutting boards. Blades, gloves and ice. Because each fish cut is a portion of rice to feed the whole family. When the market starts to get crowded, the sound of customers calling, The sound of knives chopping. The sound of water pouring from the tap to wash the cutting boards resounds like a symphony of working life. The fish cutters still work hard in the crowd. No one pays much attention to them. But they are the soul of the seafood market, the people who silently bring beautiful shapes to each piece of fish to the hands of consumers. Life in the Taiwanese market continues like that. With sweat, sharp knives and giant fish. In each cut, there is a silent story of how many people make a living. None of them are famous. But if they were absent one day, the market would lack a part of its soul. Next to the giant grouper butchering area is a row of counters specializing in processing sea eels. There, people not only cut, but also perform a processing art that only the most skilled people can perform smoothly in a few minutes. After peeling the skin, the eels will be washed, cut into neat pieces or sliced as thin as paper to be used to roll sushi. Customers who come to buy are often chefs from Japanese restaurants. They stand right at the counter observing every movement of the cutter to make sure that the freshness and technique are up to standard. A middle-aged woman, her face hardened by the wind and rain, is squatting on a low plastic chair. In front of her is a pile of eels that have just been scooped out of a bucket of ice water. She worked so quickly that it seemed like she didn't need to think, holding the eel tightly with her left hand, making a smooth cut with her right hand, then peeling off the skin with a decisive movement. A minute later, the eel had turned into strips of sparkling white meat, neatly arranged on a tray. She didn't need to advertise or solicit, but there were always regular customers waiting to buy. Here, there were young men who were just learning the trade. They started by washing the fish, wiping the cutting board, and sharpening the knives. Every day, they observed, learned each movement, each way of moving the knife, how to distinguish between live eel and nearly spoiled eel. Some people spent a year before the teacher allowed them to stand on the main cutting board. Some also gave up because they couldn't stand the intensity of the work. But those who overcome it will become master craftsmen after a few years, and that is the turning point in their lives. The market is not only a place for trading, but also a place to pass on the profession. A classroom without a blackboard, without a textbook, only the strong smell of fish blood, the smell of iron smoke when the knife is sharpened, and the silent lessons passed through hands and eyes. For many people, cutting a 100 kilograms grouper is a live performance that attracts both domestic and foreign tourists. They take out their phones to record, admiring the decisive knife swings and the dexterity that is no different from surgery. But for the market workers, it is just a normal working day. They do not act, they live their true life. The giant groupers, the long eels are their source of life, their livelihood, the rice for their children to study and become good people. And so, day after day, year after year, generations grew up from the very fish chopping boards, from the hands of their parents stained with fish blood every early morning. In this market, there are no stage lights, no flashy glitter. There are only silent people, the sound of knives echoing like the rhythm of life, drops of sweat falling and mixing with the ice, and an unspoken pride, the pride of the fish butcher. When the sun rises high, the market begins to empty. The noise also quiets down. The last worker washes the knives. Stacks the chopping boards. Collects the fish bones and fins for the garbage truck to pick up. Their hands tremble with cold. Their backs are tired, but their eyes still shine with satisfaction. Another day of making a living has passed. They will return home, rest for a few hours, then wake up at midnight, and continue the familiar cycle. In Taiwan, where modern life is permeating the streets, the market is still the place to preserve the old industries, the place where people live most authentically with their survival instincts. And among the myriad of everyday images, perhaps nothing is more haunting and touching than the image of an old worker, holding a knife, his eyes following each grain of fish meat, as if he were rereading his own life through each slice. When night falls, Taipei City is brightly lit. Shopping malls are sparkling. People are walking, eating, and entertaining. But in another world, the seafood market near the port, the fish cutters have taken a few hours of sleep, preparing for another long night. Because at 1 a.m. is when the fishing boats dock. Each batch of giant grouper, each basket of fresh eel is brought straight to the market. And the cycle of making a living begins all over again. In the yellow light of the night market, familiar faces appeared, knives in hand, boots on feet, raincoats covered with fish scales and the smell of sea salt. No one complained of fatigue. No one complained of hardship. Because in their world, every day cutting fish was a day to live. This job did not promise wealth, nor fame, but it was enough to support a wife. Raise children, buy a small house, and eat a hot meal after work. Many people in the market often said to each other in a joking but sincere tone, "Here, whoever can still cut fish is still healthy, still able to support the family." There was a man over 60 years old who still stood at the cutting board every morning. His veins were clearly visible. His back was hunched. But his eyes were still as sharp as the blade in his hand. He used to be a legend in the grouper cutting profession, having processed a fish weighing more than 120 kilograms in less than 20 minutes. Even now, despite his poor health, he is still respected by his children and grandchildren in the profession. Occasionally, people come to ask to learn the trade, and he teaches them every cut, every stance, so they don't slip when the fish is slippery. The female workers are no less competitive. They are mothers, wives, grandmothers, silent warriors. A woman over 50, with small but extremely flexible hands, can cut hundreds of eels in a morning. The eel skin she peels is straight, without tearing, and the remaining meat is not shredded, meeting the absolute standards for high-end Japanese restaurants. She once said, "When I first started working, I was cut by a knife at least 5 times a day. But no one complained. When the blood flowed, I washed it, bandaged my hand, and continued. This profession does not allow me to stop." The story of making a living at the Taiwanese seafood market is not just about slicing fish or skillful movements. but also a whole culture of diligence, perseverance and dexterity. Taiwanese people have a saying, "A sharp knife is not as good as a practiced hand," meaning that no matter how good the tool is, it is not as good as a hand that is familiar with the job. And here, there are hundreds of such hands, rough, calloused, but full of skill and pride in their work. When a giant grouper is placed on the table, it is not simply to divide the meat to sell to customers. That is when the worker shows off a lifetime of experience. They know where to cut for sashimi, where to put in hot pot, the bones for broth, the fish head for Chinese restaurants, the fish belly for Japanese restaurants. Each cut is a decision, a deep understanding of the fish body. No need for books. No need for technology, just eyes and hands. Life at the seafood market still flows quietly in the middle of the modern city. No one knows the faces of those workers. But thanks to them, the steamed grouper plates, the fatty sashimi pieces, the fragrant eel hot pots on the dining table can be complete. They are the invisible people behind the lights. But they are the foundation for an entire sophisticated food supply chain. One day, when the last worker washes the knife for the last time, puts it on the rack and quietly leaves, it is also the time when a part of the market loses its soul. Because the market is not only a place to sell fish, but also a place to preserve traditional crafts, ancient industries, where the ups and downs of lives are written with fish scales, blood, sweat and perseverance. And in the heart of modern Taiwan, the seafood market, with its fish and eel cutters, continues to breathe, continues to live. Not flashy, not noisy, but full of pride. Because in each slice is the soul of a nation that knows how to live with its hands and unyielding heart. Many visitors to Taiwan's seafood markets are often surprised by the sight they see when they first enter the market, not because of the big fish, nor because of the strong fishy smell, but because of the skill and absolute concentration of the people doing the job. In a world where technology and machines are gradually replacing human labor, this place still retains its ancient rhythm, where a sharp knife, a calloused hand and a wooden cutting board are enough to create a miracle of the profession. A young man, about 28, named Hao, the third generation in his family to cut grouper. He recounted his life story while wiping his knife in the early morning market. When I was young, I was afraid of fish. I didn't dare touch it. But my father said, "You don't need to love the job. Just understand it." And so I learned. Cutting fish is not just about chopping, but also about listening. The fish is dead but its body still has a soul. We must respect it as a part of the ocean. How is one of the few young people still attached to this profession, a profession that modern youth considers hard. Smelly and without a future. However, if viewed from another angle, the seafood market is a stage, and the fish cutters are artists. They do not need beautiful costumes, do not need stage lights. But each of their movements, from the time the knife touches the fish skin until the meat slices are neatly arranged on the tray, are all part of a performance that has been honed throughout their lives. There are cold, rainy mornings. The water is up to their ankles. But the workers still bend over the cutting board, not missing a scratch, not making a single cut. Because for them, fish is not just food, it is the pride of their hands. the honor of their profession. The story of the giant 100 kilograms grouper or the wriggling eels is probably just a small part of the life of making a living at the market. Behind that are hundreds of stories of children growing up amidst the smell of fish, the sound of sharpening knives, and their parents' red eyes from lack of sleep. Some people used the money from cutting fish to send their children to college. Some saved their whole lives to buy a small apartment in the suburbs. Some lost their health because the sharp blade had cut their hands and tendons, and then returned to the profession because they were used to it and couldn't quit. An old worker named Lamb, over 70 years old, used to be the best fish cutter in the market. Now no longer has the strength to stand for long. But every morning he comes early to sit in the corner of the market watching his students work. He doesn't talk much, only occasionally reminding, when the knife wears out, you sharpen it. When you're tired, you rest. But you have to maintain your skills. People respect him not for his reputation, but because he has lived his whole life with the profession, never missing a single market day in 40 years. He often sits silently, holding a cup of hot tea, looking at the giant grouper fish cut neatly like his own life, each piece, each slice, clearly and neatly. The seafood market in Taiwan is not like the sterile, shiny supermarkets. It is noisy, humid, sometimes chaotic. But it is where people are most real, with laughter, shouting, even conflicts fighting for customers. And also where there are tight handshakes between people who live in the same profession. Here, people do not care about high or low. Whoever cuts fish well, who delivers on time, who keeps his word, that person is respected. No need for a degree. No need for a degree, just the hands that make a living. And so, in the heart of the modern city, where people are increasingly chasing convenience and speed, there is still a labor oasis called the seafood market, where slices of fish, eels, and human lives are carved every early morning. There, the workers still persevere to support their families, nurture traditions, and quietly preserve a part of the most authentic Taiwanese soul. The sky gradually brightens. The weak sunlight shines through the old corrugated iron roofs of the market. Reflecting sparklingly on the stagnant water and melted ice buckets, the customers begin to thin out. The workers quietly clean up. Knives are washed with cold water, wiped with cloth, and neatly stacked in locked wooden boxes. Cutting boards are scrubbed vigorously with steel brushes to remove the remaining fish blood and eel skin. The fishy smell still lingers in the air, but to them, it is as familiar as the smell of their own sweat. Inseparable.